Hi, friends. This reflection is for the fifth Sunday of Ordinary Time. I think if we have to look at the readings for this Sunday, we hear some really good phrases and some images that are painted. We look at all three of the readings, and somehow we get quite a bit of images. First of all, there is something that we have to look at ourselves when we think about these readings. Because you see, we have this little theme of obedience. Now, Christians have a duty to discern their vocation. Vocation comes from the Latin vocare, which means to call, right? And let's face it, when people think vocation, they probably think right away, oh, maybe it's just about, priest, sister, brother, layman, married, whatever. In actuality, there's a little more to it. It all could be about your job, right? Now, there's two ways to look at vocation. Number one, are we open to the will of God, including the possibility of celibacy, religious life, or the priesthood when we discern our vocation? And let's face it, it is not an easy thing to do. If you talk to some of the big names in the church, like Sister Miriam, Father Mike Schmitz, at one point they were thinking, I want to go down this path. But God had something else in mind. And eventually, it's where they got, right? The second way to look at vocation is, for those who found their vocation, are we faithful to it even when it's difficult? Now, let's face it. No one said it was going to be easy, right? Even our faith journey is not easy at all. Getting to the Super Bowl is not so easy. And I record this video, with the 59th Super Bowl that will most likely be underway at some point after you see this video, right? And given me being the Catholic Philadelphian, yes, the Eagles are in there, and they're playing against the Chiefs. They could deny history, and then they could make history on their own accord. But I digress. Okay. The prophet Isaiah talks about when it comes to obedience, the prophet Isaiah the reading from Isaiah ends with, "Whom should I send? Who will go for us? Here I am, send me." C.S. Lewis once said, there's two ways to look at it. Number one, thy will be done, or your will be done. Or I should rather say, my will be done. So another way to look at it, friends, is that what C.S. Lewis reminds us is that, are you doing God's will? Or is it all about me? So how do we become more aware of God? Frequent use of the sacraments, praying, thinking of others, doing what Jesus would do. In the gospel from Luke, there are some phrases that kind of jump out at me. Number one is we look at how Peter is exhausted. He fished all night. And then Jesus comes along and says, you know what? Why don't you go over there and you fish? And of course, Peter could have said, he's crazy. I'm not going to do it. I'm tired. But every so often, we're like Peter. There are times where we may not feel like doing it, but deep down, we have to do the will of God. There are times we got to make sacrifices, even though we're probably not in the right state of mind to do it, but it has to be done. It's an act of surrender, an act of humility, if you will. All St. Peter did was place his trust in Jesus. Pope Benedict XVI reminds us, throughout life, there are hours of darkness, hours of alarm at oneself. But there is also the dawning of the insight that Christ's power is greater than our helplessness. His mercy is greater than our failure. The presence of God is awe-inspiring and glorious. He both dwells within us and is boundless in his majesty. What a privilege it is that this great God wants to know and have a personal relationship with each of us. It doesn't matter how many times you're sinning. It doesn't matter how low you are. God wishes to reach down and care for you. He wants you to be in that net that's going to be cast into the deep. He wants you to be a part of it. And one phrase Jesus, when he invited those apostles to follow him, was, "Come, and I want you to be fishers of men," catching men. Now, what does this catching of men has to do? Well, it's really simple. We want to invite others to the fray. And I think one of the things I think Christians really need to do now, I'm not just saying like Protestants may be doing this pretty well, but I think Catholics really need to, step up their game. I think one of the things that Catholics really need to do is they have, like, evangelization may think like, oh, you're just going to go somewhere, you're going to go to public square and preach the gospel. It's not just there. It's everywhere. The office. When you go to the grocery store. When you're at the mall. Now, I'm going to tell you this. Don't enlist and train to be a keyboard warrior. It sucks. Okay? That's not for anybody. And it's not even for the faint of heart. Believe me. Even Pope Francis was saying we need a culture of encounter. And it's not just had to do with the screen. As a matter of fact, I'm recording a video in front of one right now, right? He's not talking about that. Rather, he wants us to be out there. All we need to do is just cast that net out into the deep. You get a catch, that's great. If you don't, you got to keep trying. All it takes is our persevering faith. And a humble surrender. Those are the key ingredients that will help us in evangelizing to others. Psalm 138. Because of your kindness and your truth, for you have made great things above all things, your name and your promise. When I called, you answered me. You build up strength within me. Friends, be fishers of men. Cast that net. Do not be afraid. Obey the will of God. One final thought. Does obedience have limits? You bet. Suppose you are a German Catholic and a German bishop told you to accept the blessing of sin. Yeah, I'll talk about same-sex marriage. Will you obey it? Or will you stand your ground and tell the bishop you're wrong? I cannot endorse sin. Likewise, if a bishop told me to not pray in front of abortion facilities, would I obey him or man? Let's face it, the Catholic Church for 2 millenniums has been flawed. And history has been made by flawed men. Go figure, right? And many members of the clergy, bishop, cardinals, popes, priests alike, have not been squeaky clean. And it's alarming. But the good news is we keep the faith. We be fishers of men. So friends, cast out that net and give God your total surrender when the going gets rough. He will work wonders. God bless.